Welcome to News Inside. I'm An Jang-hyun. Our panelists are with us once again, Professor Shin Sang-hyuk and Dr. Bong Young-sik.
Good to be here.
Let's start by taking a look at our first topic of discussion.
President Park Geun-hye embarks on a trip to Iran on May 1st in response to an invitation extended by Tehran. She is scheduled to hold summit talks with Iranian President Hassan Rouhani to discuss cooperation on economic and cultural exchanges, among others. It has been 54 years since Seoul and Tehran have established diplomatic ties. Although sanctions have placed limitations on bilateral trade, Korea's exports to the Islamic Republic last year exceeded $4.1 billion. Now, with nuclear-related sanctions lifted, the population of 80 million not only offers great potential as a consumer market, but also as a rich supplier of resources such as natural gas and oil, making it an attractive economic partner for Korea. This is why the two countries earlier this year reopened a joint commission on economic cooperation that had been suspended since 2007. Through these talks, the two sides have laid the foundation to elevate their relationship to genuine long-term partners for shared prosperity. Also worth taking note is the historic nuclear deal Iran was able to seal with major powers in July last year. This comes as Seoul faces its own struggles with Pyongyang's nuclear weapons ambitions. Iran is quickly emerging as an attractive partner on the global stage, and with fierce competition to gain a stronger footing at the budding market, there are high expectations for President Park Geun-hye's visit to the Islamic Republic.
On May 1st, President Park Geun-hye begins her state visit to Iran, where she will hold summit talks with President Hassan Rouhani. President Park is Korea's first head of state to visit Iran since the two countries established diplomatic ties back in 1962. Now, as with Mexico, there's a great deal of interest in breaking into the Iranian market as well. But with the economic interests aside, from the perspective of diplomacy, what would you say is the significance of this trip?
Well, Iran is going to be the regional superpower, especially when it's pitted against another regional power, which is Saudi Arabia, representing the Shiite as opposed to the Sunni members in the region. So not only President Park Geun-hye's trip to Iran has economic significance, but also it's very important from the standpoint of international relations.
Mm-hmm. Now, as we said earlier, Korea is not the only country eyeing Iran at the moment. Chinese President Xi Jinping already visited in January, right after international sanctions were lifted. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is looking to visit this year as well. What is so attractive about the Iranian market?
Well, Iran is certainly an attractive market for the many countries. First of all, Iran has the abundant natural resources. Let me tell you more details. Iran has the fourth largest oil reserves in the world. And in terms of the natural gas, Iran is in the second place in the world. On the top of these resources, they have also abundant mineral resources such as iron, copper, and even uranium. So first of all, Iran has abundant natural resources. Well, as you know very well, the global economy has been slowed down over the last years. And then Iran was under the nuclear-related sanctions imposed by Western countries. But recently, the sanction was lifted. So Iran is expected to have the huge purchasing powers. Very recently, Iranian government and French government concluded an agreement which was worth of about the $4 billion contract, including the purchase of 118 Airbuses. And also another European country, Italian government, has also concluded an agreement with the Iranian government, which was equivalent to about $2 billion contract. So in this context, definitely, on a short-term basis, definitely Iran will be one of the most important markets in the world. Thirdly, I think on the middle long-term basis, the potentiality Iran has is very huge because the age structure of the population is very interesting and also very important for us. According to the report, out of total population, the ratio of the population under 30 years old takes about 60%. That means that Iran is a very young country. Young country means that they have the high ratio of the productive age group, which means that, well, as a trading partner or as an industrial partner, definitely Iran will be one of the most important countries in the world. So considering all of this, certainly Iran is one of the very important countries for many countries around the world, and particularly for Korea.
Well, Korea and Iran have been engaged in trade, bilateral trade over the years, but because of the U.S. sanctions that ban transactions in dollars, what we have in place is a won-based settlement system. The two sides have agreed that they're going to maintain this current system for the time being. What are the merits and demerits of this system?
Well, still, the USA dollar can be used as a way of payment for the trade between two countries. Under such a kind of the restrictive conditions, well, one is one of the easiest way of payment for us. That means that to promote the mutual trade, definitely one settlement system seems to be the best options available to Korea in an effort to promote the mutual trade, I think. One of the demerits, which I want to underline, is the Iranian currency is not very stable. I mean, there has been some fluctuations in the value of Iranian currency against Korean won, which means that particularly over the last several months, the Iranian currency, rial, has been weakened against Korean currency. That means that without doing anything, without changing any conditions, the Korean producers will lose a price competitive advantages in Iranian market. So the unstable the value of the local currency can be one of the negative factors for mutual trade between two countries when we use Korean currency and the local currency, Iranian local currency, as a way of payment, I think.
Okay. Now, as for the landmark nuclear deal that was reached last year in July, since then it seems Iran has been holding up its end of the bargain. Perhaps the so-called snapback mechanism is a strong motivator here. Would you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, snapback is a journalistic term. The official term is a reimposition clause, which is included in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action signed last year, which will last for 10 years until October 2025. So we can say that until we see the final outcome in October 2025, we cannot really say that we are free from the Iranian nuclear issue. The snapback clause or the reimposition clause is about the condition in which if any one member of the P5+1 discovered Iran's violation of the deal, redevelopment of the nuclear weapon programs, and taking an issue at the Iran resuming the activities related to nuclear weapon system, then the Joint Commission composed by the P+1 and European Union will begin investigation of the issue. And the case conclusion will be sent to the United Nations Security Council. And all this process should be made, and the conclusion should be drawn within 35 days. If the Commission failed to, for any reason, to reach a conclusion in that period, then all bets are off, and the Iranian sanction will resume. So the Iranian case is carrying a huge business risk because there is no protection of the investment in Iran, assuming that the agreement will stay put for until 2025.
Well, the Iran nuclear deal is of particular interest to us with North Korea as our neighbor and its ongoing nuclear development. Some have pointed out that Iran may be able to play a role in bringing North Korea to the negotiating table. What do you think?
Well, I wish Iranian government could, but I doubt there's not much contribution Iran can make in terms of persuading North Korea to follow the case of Iran. Compared to Iran, North Korea has already developed nuclear weapons. So North Korea has far more to give up in order to get the benefits of diplomatic recognition and economic assistance compared to Iran. And two, North Korea and Iran has a very different economic structures. Iranian economy is critically dependent upon trade.
Trade, right.
The economy, 32% of Iranian GDP is dependent upon export, especially the oil reserves. And the 66% of government revenue in Iran comes from energy sectors. So if there be an economic sanction imposed on Iran, then there will be a great pain to be felt and assumed by Iranian leadership. But North Korea is not an exporting or importing country. So there's an inherent limitation on the effect of economic sanctions on North Korea. And third, the neighboring countries' resolve to solve the nuclear issue is quite different. China has been really lenient toward the nuclear North Korea compared to very significant measures taken by European Unions and United States, even hurting the interest of its own domestic corporations and allies by suspending all the transactions with the Iranian banks. So combine all these differences between Iran and North Korea, I don't think the formula of solving the Iranian nuclear case will be applicable to the case of North Korea.
I guess we'll have to wait and see when President Park Geun-hye returns from her trip to see what kind of economic and political and diplomatic achievements can be
There
made.
has been a criticism then why she has to go to Iran at this critical juncture, especially in the immediate aftermath of National Assembly election. But there is a good reason for her to take this trip to Iran. Because according to the analysis made by the Federation of Korean Industries, then President Park Geun-hye's summit diplomacy has contributed for the past 4 years to adding about $68 billion in creating overseas business opportunities and projects, let alone moving ahead with the ongoing negotiations on the free trade agreement with the countries and eliminating non-tariff barriers in case of Korea-China trade relations.
Right.
So,
Considering the other countries' approaches to Iran, I think this is the high time for President Park Geun-hye to pay her official visit. Because the point which I want to underline regarding the Iranian market, they tasted the capitalism in the past. They are returning to the capitalism just right now. So I think the risk-taking maybe could be not big as we expected. So I think by having the summit meeting with the Iranian counterpart, I think as has done so far, she could contribute to the increase our influences over the overseas market, I think.
right. One possible gross misunderstanding about Iran is that Iran has been the leading country in terms of modernization, in terms of gender equality, higher education for women, and the openness to foreign culture, especially pop culture. Iran is a different case compared to other countries in the Middle East. So it is very important for countries, including South Korea, to tap onto very young, urbanized, progressive population in Iran for future business and political partnerships.
Perhaps it is wise that we turn our attention to overseas economic opportunities, because back at home, corporate restructuring has emerged as one of the top domestic agenda items these days, with both the ruling and opposition parties stressing the urgency of the matter. Arirang News has been covering recent developments. Here's a recap of the latest.
Korea's Finance Minister Yoo Il-ho says the government will push ahead with plans to overhaul the country's industrial makeup.
The government, as well as the ruling and opposition parties, gearing up to form a consultative body to discuss the issue. The country's top central banker Lee Ju-yeol also said the Bank of Korea will lay out measures to counteract potential financial instabilities that could be prompted by the corporate shakeup.
The government knows that time is of the essence to save these struggling industries. It's looking to push through with restructuring before political burdens start to mount ahead of next year's presidential election.
The financial regulator is looking at strict restructuring, especially for shipbuilders and shipping firms.
The Financial Services Commission also announced a plan to limit the fallout from its restructuring scheme. It vowed to expand the assets of state-run banks and come up with measures to support workers who are laid off.
So the government has been at the forefront of this drive, reflecting just how big of a problem it sees the ailing corporate sector as. But at the same time, some have questioned whether a government-led initiative like this would be able to produce the desired effects And we have past records that prove otherwise, don't we?
Well, I think you singled out the correct keyword, which is urgency. And urgency would pressure government and the society to do something immediately. Otherwise, the Korean economy will lose the golden opportunity to maintain long-term growth potential. And it is debatable what would constitute that something that will help revive Korean national economy. But it is true that South Korean economy is in the state of so-called consumption cliff. In the first quarter of the year 2016, the consumption rate is as low as the consumption rate during the MERS crisis last year. Consumers stay home and did not open their purses. So because of this dismal rate of consumption in domestic market, the government must have felt that it should take some strong measures to boost the consumers' confidence and the growth potential in the national economy.
Well, so far the government has been a little careful not to overstep its boundaries, but one possible scenario definitely involves mergers and acquisitions. That's something I guess we need to think and rethink over and over again, because we've seen that these so-called big deals have risks and problems of their own.
Yes, I think the government, if possible, does not intervene in the corporate restructuring. But look at the urgency, as Dr. Bong pointed out. The government should do something. Let me give you more details. The government watched 5 industrial sectors, particularly shipbuilding industry and shipping industries, show very serious situations to us. In the shipbuilding industry, there are big 3 we have. All these 3 are the shipbuilding companies would have about 8 trillion won deficit at the end of this year. Particularly Daewoo shipbuilding industry, they would have about 5.3 trillion won. That is about the $5 billion deficit. And then even the government tried to save them, so they invested a lot of money already, but the situations remain unchanged. So considering the shipbuilding industries around the world, and then look at the current domestic situations, I mean shipbuilding industries, well, we cannot deny that there are not much hope left. So government should take initiatives in corporate restructuring. The government has been criticized whenever they try to do something in an effort to achieve the corporate restructuring. But when you look at the other side of the coin, whenever the government involved in this kind of the activity, they could produce some change. When they leave the situation on the hand of the private sector, well, we could not see any successful cases. So considering this one, maybe we should just wait what kind of measures government will take. But personally, I think it's not desirable, but the government should do something considering current situations we have.
I guess the key is in finding a balance between government support, let's call it, and private
If I do one thing more, because when government does something, they should take also the responsibility of the outcome. So the government certainly have some burden in doing something regarding the corporate restructuring. But as we discussed so far, the situation is not very, we don't have enough time, and the situation is quite urgent. So I think this is time for the government to do something.
But it's a still very tricky matter regarding government assuming the responsibility. In principle, that's a correct statement, but because it's a single-term 5-year presidency system, the responsibility of decision made by the predecessor will be assumed by the next leadership. So it's a very delicate measure how to assess the responsibility of very tough decision made in the name of reviving the national economy and protect the citizens.
And then everyone's playing the blame game.
Blame game, right. That's the core play of any politics. And we cite the case of China under the Xi Jinping administration going gung-ho in terms of company restructuring initiatives, especially focused on cement industry, coal industry, and steel industry. So it might be just a global trend facing the era of chronic stagnation and low rate of economic growth, which is termed as a new normal. But at the same time, we cannot just compare other countries' case without critical assessment, because yes, there are cases in UK and the United States that the government promoted corporate restructuring and workout. But in case of the United States, under the Reagan administration, the basic principle was to let the market decide the outcome. It was not led by the government, but it was through deregulations and market mechanisms. And it'll be a very tough challenge for the Park Geun-hye administration to have the right mix of deregulations and the market mechanism and strong and effective government leadership over the corporations in trouble.
You know, we have to wonder how the government is trying to finance these restructuring plans.
I think the agony which the government has is when they implement a quantitative easing policy, if the market does not work, there can be a fatal blow against the Korean economy itself. Well, we can see the similar phenomena, situations in Europe, even in Japan. So the government officials are really worried about this aspect. But the another aspect is that then what kind of the policies are available to the Korean government? So they are jammed. I think.
Exactly.
So they seem to have a very hard time. But I think about this point, the government should consider all options available to them. I mean, with more time. Of course, we don't have enough time, but within the given time, they should do their best to find the best policies available to them. And then to answer your question, yes, I think to implement the corporate restructuring, they should provide lots of money to the involving companies or involving industries. It requires huge money. At the same time, the government should have to prepare the situations after the corporate restructuring. Let me give you an example. When they close down the one shipbuilding yard, definitely local economy will be hit the bottom.
Right.
And then without the measures for them after the corporate restructuring, definitely situations will be out of control. So as far as I know, the government should prepare some measures for them, including retraining costs. And then also they should have to make some efforts provided or create new jobs for them, not only in the region but also the other national level. So it costs a lot of money. So these days there have been some report, government considering arrange some supplementary budget for this kind of actions. But I think it's too early to do that. We had still enough money, particularly the industrial bank, which is in charge of this kind of affairs in the financial sector. They seem to have enough money still. The government should put more priorities on the measures for the people who will be the subject to corporate restructuring. The industries are. So I think this will be very important.
Well, it is one of the preconditions proposed by the opposition, the Minju party, right? Solutions to massive job losses.
Right. I mean, the opposition party is in an unenviable position that it doesn't really have to lead the policy-making process, but just watch the whole process and give healthy criticism on behalf of constituents. And the head of the Minju Party of Korea, Mr. Kim Jong-in, actually confirmed that any corporation restructure should be something fundamental and aggressive. Fundamental and aggressive, but it depends on how you define the content of being fundamental and aggressive without causing too much pain on the people, the employees and their families, who will be subject to the very painful and difficult process. And I like to highlight the aspect of collective psychology and political culture in South Korea because of this prolonged economic stagnation and the sense of urgency about looming economic crisis coming from the shipbuilding industry. When we divide the Korean politics according to ideology, we tend to just divide South Korean politics into two camps, the conservative and the progressive. What we have been neglecting is another line of divide that define the South Korean politics, which is the generational thing. That we say that the Korean War generation and the post-Korean War generation, but there's another generational line, which is called the IMF crisis generation, who during their childhood witnessed their welfare and the home economy totally collapsed by something that's beyond their control. So these young generation was born and raised with this sense of uncertainty and great deal of anxiety about uncertain future. That is why young South Koreans are really unhappy according to the International Index of Happiness, and they are criticized for being so passive. But there's a good reason for them to be really passive, realistic, because they have a certain memory of the economic difficulties.
Well, it is their reality right now, too.
Right. But after 20 years later, now they are facing, when they're about to graduate from the college, basically the same economic climate.
Exactly.
So this collective psychology will be something that should be dealt by politicians in the future.
Another problem weighing on people's minds these days is the air quality. We're seeing high levels of yellow dust and particulate matter. Last Saturday, PM levels in Seoul reached an average 198 micrograms per cubic meter, the highest so far this year. So let me ask you two, do you actually physically feel the effects of this particle pollution?
Yes, particularly when I feel tired, definitely. I had some hard time because of yellow dust.
Right. Dr. Wong?
I began taking the allergy pills.
Oh.
It's about time.
Well, it's the allergy season, right?
Right.
The allergies or the pollen season comes naturally
but
with
I
spring.
can taste the difference in the air, the pollen and the microdust.
Well, it seems that this problem is becoming worse every year. So we talked to an expert about yellow dust and particulate matter, what causes it and what can be done about it.
황사는 이제 건조해지는 저기압이 발전해 봄철이나 가을철에 주로 발생하는 건 맞습니다. 왜냐하면 그때는 상대적으로 비도 적게 오기 때문에 모래바람들이나 이런 것들이 많이 발생하고요. 하지만 미세먼지는 1년 내내 발생한다고 보면 맞습니다. 다만 겨울철에는, 여름철에는 상대적으로 비도 많이 오고 바람도 많이 불기 때문에 미세먼지가 발생한다 하더라도 금방 해소가 되기 때문에 우리가 느끼기엔 좀 덜하다고 느껴지는 거고요. 황사는 중국 고비 사막이라든가 사막 같은 데서 저기압에 의해서 흙먼지가 상공으로 날아올라 높은 상공에서 바람을 타고 우리나라 상공을 지나가다가 그 기압이 조금 떨어지게 되면 우리나라에 떨어지는 일종의 흙먼지입니다. 통상 미세먼지는 우리 인간들이 활동하는 활동 속에서 발생하는 여러 가지 환경적 요인으로 발생을 하는데요. 우리나라에서 발생하는 원인들은 주로 자동차가 가장 이제 도심 지역에서는 크고요. 또 이제 공장지대에 가면은 화학 공장이라든가 특히 되면 소각장이라든가 그다음에 화력 발전소라든가 이런 다양한 인위적인 활동에 의해서 많은 미세먼지들이 발생하고 있습니다. 황사는 자연 흙바람에 의해서 나오는 거라 알갱이가 상대적으로 커서요. 황사 자체로만은 인체에 그렇게 크게 영향은 없습니다. 그렇지만 미세먼지는 황사와 다르게 작은 알갱이가 우리 폐나 또 기관지 등으로 침출해서 그 혈관계 질환이라든가 또 심혈관계 질환들, 그다음에 폐결핵이라든가 폐 질환들을 일으킬 수 있는 가능성이 높기 때문에 WHO에서도 1군 발암 물질로 규명하고 또 우리도 그거에 관련된 기준들을 가지고 여러 가지 이제 저감 정책들이나 국민들에게 알리는 예보제라든가 이런 걸 시행하고 있는 것입니다.
So China is not to blame for everything, at least not entirely.
Not
for
entirely.
Fine
Not
dust
entirely,
anyway.
right.
Yeah, in fact, Korea is still highly dependent on coal-fired power generation. Of the total amount of money Korea paid to private power generators last year, 35% went to coal-fired power plants. Liquefied natural gas power generation took up 32%. Nuclear power was at 24%, while renewable energy-based power was under 5%. Why are we still so coal dependent? Are there no alternatives?
Well, there are alternatives, but they are very expensive alternatives.
It's the money.
Are we willing to pay the cost of shifting to more environmentally friendly source of power? The answer seems to be no, not yet. The Greenpeace explains that for the carbon dioxide emission, the greenhouse gas, 44% of it comes from coal burning. So in that regard, that South Korea is also culpable of exacerbating the environmental problem. But in order to shift from coal-based power system to more use of LNG, the South Korean economy and the consumers has to assume at the minimum annual cost of 10 billion US dollars. So the question is, are we ready to assume additional cost to be more environmentally friendly? The answer is still in
Not
limbo.
yet. Yeah. Well, just last week, though, 175 nations, including Korea, came together in New York to sign the Paris Climate Change Agreement. That effectively means that they have pledged to make a transition from the fossil fuel era to a low-carbon economy, right? So in this new framework, what industries will we see emerge, and how will it affect the Korean economy?
I think it will affect strongly on the Korean economy in the future. I think I have to quote the government announcement. According to the government, Korean government, by the 2030, they set the goal, so-called smart factory. That means that combine the IT technologies with the manufacturing procedures. So by the year 2030, there will be about 40,000 so-called smart factories in Korea. And particularly, as we discussed so far, the auto industries and then the steel industries have been very notorious as the so-called chimney industry, which means that they produce many the carbon dioxide gases. I mean, greenhouse gases. So particularly in these industries, the government build so-called smart factories. That means that they will reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. And then also another one is, these days, this is really one of the hard issues among us, electric cars. Many auto industries around the world, they seem to commit themselves to produce the best quality electric cars. So, I mean, there will be a huge changes in every corner of industries in the future, I think.
But if we stay on this path, that government target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 37% from BAU levels by the year 2030, is that attainable?
It is unlikely to be attained by the government for several reasons. One is that if the South Korean government begins to impose stricter measures for environmental issues for South Korean so-called chimney industries, then it will undermine already very fragile growth potential of South Korea's industry. So South Korean government is in a very difficult, huge dilemma, whether it try to promote the industrial activities of the traditional industries, or it would try to fulfill its commitment, the intended nationally determined contribution, INDC, as a responsible member of the international society in pursuit of a better environment. So there is a dilemma. And the development of more environmentally friendly automobile, the project may be delayed because the automobile industries are having one of the greatest years thanks to very cheap oil in the international market. So it's a critical juncture, and it will be very difficult for both government and other industries to make up their mind.
What about for us citizens? We have to make some sacrifices too.
Right.
If we want to cut our reduce our dependence on coal. We're going to have to pay more in electricity utility bills. We'll have to leave our cars behind at home more often too. So this requires a collective effort.
Right. We can take small but important steps from somewhere. And another issue that will be very difficult for South Korean governments to fulfill its committed INDC in curbing the emission of the greenhouse gas, at least in near terms, is that 11.3% of its committed 37% of the reduction of greenhouse gas is based upon the cap and trade measures or promoting forestation projects and or the building railroad system in North Korea as a part of inter-Korean economic cooperation. But considering the current state of inter-Korean relations, it will be almost impossible for South Korean government to actually fulfill these plans. So that the 11.3% of the South Korea's commitment to curb down the emission of the greenhouse gas has to find different sources.
In the meantime, this fine dust problem occurs every year, and every year it seems to come back with a vengeance. It's so stronger each year. So there are growing calls for a fundamental solution to not just the fine dust problem, but air pollution in general. What measures do you think need to be drawn up here?
Well, we have discussed the solution available to us to fix this issue. Over the last several years. But comparing the what we have talked, what we have achieved is nothing, almost nothing. So very recently, I highlight the one efforts made by the governments of three countries. Korea, China, and Japan. Well, these three countries, governments share the same concern about the air pollution and PM issues. So they have a plan to establish a kind of the common research community, something like that, to find a solution to this issue. I think those kind of approaches should be recommended and should be implemented in the near future, because there must be some differences in the technologies possessed by each the government, and Japan has higher level technologies in solving the air pollution problems, and while China has been relatively behind Japan and Korean technologies. So I think by combining, cooperating among three countries, definitely we will be able to find a solution to this issue to some degree. At the same time, I think the many NGOs right now working together. Well, I know one NGO, Korean NGO. They just visit to China, and they have planted many trees in the desert area. I think this can be one of the good examples how we can strengthen the cooperation among the citizens, private. I think those kind of the efforts also should be recommended. That means what I mean is that the government level, or private level, or even industrial level, I think the very comprehensive approach should be made to fix this issue. And lastly, I think, as Dr. Bong pointed out, the Korean government also make every effort, along with the Chinese government and the Japanese government, to reduce the greenhouse gas emission in Korea, in Japan, in China. I think by doing so, we will be able to have the very clean airs in the future. And a good example is the Scotland, Glasgow. Definitely, Glasgow was very notorious as the polluted the cities in the world. But Glasgow was chosen as the city which has the largest number of the parks. And then, well, it means what? The clean environment. So I think we should get some lessons from those cities' experiences.
Hey, before we wrap up our discussion, what are your final thoughts of the week?
I want to see the clean blue skies when I was young. And so I think our three governments should make every effort to fix this issue as soon as possible.
What about you, Dr. Bong?
Well, I'd like to highlight the virtue of challenges and crisis. Crisis and challenges are painful, but that makes us take action, difficult actions and decisions. So it is time for politics to try to solve the difficult problems.
And in the meantime, I hope you survive your allergy problem this spring. Thank you two very much for sharing your thoughts
My
with
pleasure.
us. That is all for this edition of News Inside. Thanks for watching. We'll be back with more next week.